Love fam, it's your girl, the Civilized Savage, and welcome back to Between Me and You. Now, in the last entry, we explored finding your voice, and that touched on learning to express who you really are, even when it feels uncomfortable, and especially when it feels unfamiliar. Now, my experience of this process has been such that in finding your voice, something else becomes possible, and that's agency. Now, for me, agency is the ability to recognize that you have the influence over your own life, that you're not simply reacting to the circumstances, but you're actively shaping the direction in which you move. A way that I understand it, I guess, is the difference between living life as something that happens to you and living life as something that you are participating in actively, that you are creating for yourself. And that is going to be the focus of our entry today, because if finding your voice is the first step, agency is what allows you to use that voice to shape your future. So, getting into it, the idea that helped me to understand this most came from a concept that I encountered from a book that I read. Now, you don't know me, I'm constantly referencing books and quoting. I'm a big book girly, yeah. So, you're always going to get some type of book reference from me. So, this one is come from a book called The Courage to Be Disliked. This book and this concept really changed a lot for me. I'm not even going to lie to you. And it was in this book that I first came across the concept teleology. Now, teleology comes from two Greek words, telos, meaning end or purpose, and logos, meaning reason or explanation. So, put simply, teleology invites us to look at life through a different question. It's not a question of why did this happen to me, but rather, what purpose could this serve in who I'm becoming? And you know, I'm big on the becoming vibes. Shout out Michelle Obama. Now, at a first glance, the difference between those two questions might seem small, but for me, I can't even lie, it was a big change. Before encountering this idea, I spent a lot of time trying to understand my past. I'm in therapy, I've been in therapy, and if you know that if you're familiar with the therapeutic journey, you'll know that a lot of what we go through in therapy is trying to unpack childhood experiences, trying to make sense of certain patterns, figuring out why things unfolded the way that they did. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of value in this work, and many psychological traditions, especially those influenced by Freud, encourage us to explore the past in order to understand our present. Right, that's clear. We get it. And sometimes this insight can be really helpful. Personally, though, I found that constantly searching for explanations sometimes just left me like a little bit stuck. Like it's almost like you're just circling the same questions again and again without actually moving forward in some regard. So it was in reading The Courage to Be Disliked when I first encountered Alfred Adler, and his type of psychology flips the question completely on its head. Like I said before, instead of asking, why are you the way you are? He encourages us to ask, what goal might my behavior be serving right now? So, in other words, like our lives are not just shaped by our past experiences and everything that happened before, they're also shaped by the direction we choose in the present moment. And this is precisely where agency comes into play. Because if your past doesn't completely determine your future, then you have far more influence over the meaning of your experiences than you might have realized. Seems logical, right? Of course it does. It's almost like one of those ones that are so simple. It's like, why did you never think of this before? Why did I never think of this before? And this realization really changed the way I looked at my own life, especially when it came to things like adverse childhood experiences, and particularly in my late ADHD diagnosis. For so long, those things felt like things that I really had to unpack and unravel and get to the bottom of, in order to be able to understand myself. And then I was just like, actually, maybe not. Actually, maybe teleology, maybe agency, maybe the power to decide what my experiences mean moving forward was actually the vibe. And if you yourself are a little bit into psychology in any kind of way, then you'll be able to draw the links between this concept and a lot of the work that Carl Jung kind of talks about. He talks a lot about individuation, that lifelong process of becoming your true self. And part of that process involves confronting what he called the shadow. Those are kind of like the hidden, rejected parts of ourselves. But I kind of feel like Jung didn't see those parts as things to erase. He saw them as almost like the raw materials for transformation, so to speak. And in many ways, teleology moves in that same type of direction because, again, they're encouraging us to ask, what might my past be preparing me for, as opposed to what's wrong with me because of my past? Now, as I mentioned before, with my whole situation with my late ADHD diagnosis, and I'm not that person who consistently tries to make their diagnosis their personality, but it is a real thing for me. So I'm going to talk about what's real for me. And an example from my life, given this situation that we're talking about, is that growing up, there were moments where I felt so misunderstood. Like I constantly feel like people just didn't get me and I was always being misread, misinterpreted, and all the things. And there were moments when I felt really inadequate, etc., etc. And if you've ever navigated life with ADHD, that feeling might sound highly familiar to you. For a long time, I believed those experiences were simply just like life wounds. And these kind of held me back a little bit. But when I started applying can't even say the word, teleological, teleological thinking, something interesting happened. At least I believe it did. And it's interesting for me that those same experiences just started to look different. The feeling of being misunderstood became more of a motivation for me to communicate better. The feeling of why can't I speak today? The feeling of inadequacy became a drive to grow and evolve. And I guess like that struggle energy became more like a fueling energy. So it was less of a restriction and a limitation and rather kind of like a springboard to propel me into other things. So on that note, I want to ask you guys something. And this is a question I generally love for you to reflect on. How might your life look different if you approached it as something you were consciously creating rather than something you were simply responding to? Like, if the past suddenly stopped being the explanation for everything, and instead it became the material you use to shape who you become next, what might change for you? Because think about it. If two people experience the exact same event, but one person interprets it as proof that they are limited, while the other interprets it as motivation to grow, their lives will move in completely different directions, right? Although they've experienced the same thing, the meaning that they've assigned to it changes everything. And for me, that is the power of agency. That is the essence of teleological thinking. So with that in mind, I want to invite you in on a small little experiment, because you know we do this every week. So take a moment and reflect on your life. Is there an area where you feel stuck? Maybe a memory you keep revisiting, maybe a situation where you keep asking yourself, why did this happen to me? We've all been there. You know, that kind of woe is me victim mentality. Yeah, we're shifting out of that, guys. And instead, try asking yourself, how is this experience serving me in creating the person I want to become? Or what direction could this experience be pointing me toward? Now, remember, there's no perfect answers. It's just an opportunity to notice what happens when we question, what arises when we explore. Because sometimes a single shift in perspective can open an entirely new path forward and change our way of thinking completely. Now, I'm keeping it short and sweet today because I'm working towards shorter entries. It's just an exploration. We're going to see how this works out. But if today's entry has resonated with you in any way, I really highly recommend that you read The Courage to Be Disliked. I'll drop it in the description box somewhere. It's a super powerful exploration of Adlerian psychology and the idea that we are far more free to shape our lives than we often tend to believe. If you're one of my regular listeners and you were with me on the previous episode about finding your voice, I guess you can kind of consider this the next step, because finding your voice is powerful, but learning to use that voice to shape your future, that's where the transformation really begins. Now, before we close, I'm going to leave you with one final reflection. There's been a few today, actually, I'm not going to lie. But an additional one for you guys is, what story about your past are you still repeating? And what new story might become possible if you approached your life from a place of agency instead? And there we have it. So if this episode resonated with you, share your reflections in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys came up with. And if you'd like to continue these conversations, make sure you're subscribed. New journal entries drop every Wednesday. And I've done it within 10 minutes. Look at that. Go me. Until next time, guys, I've been the Civilized Savage, and this has been Between Me and You.